And we are recording with the one and only. I always get so self-conscious sometimes when I start to introduce the guest that I'm going to forget their name. Dr. Barrett on Monday, June 12th, 2023 at 3:41 p.m. Eastern time. And this is today's episode. And guys, if you want, you can go to the description. You can find more about Dr. Barrett. You can find links to his websites, to his writings, to all that good stuff, and to his shows. And False Flag Weekly News is a great one. I got to go on that, and that was badass. But this is something that we've brought up before, and I think you actually brought it up on the first time that we spoke, was the MIHOP versus LIHOP hypothesis. I am of the LIHOP mindset, let it happen on purpose, and that the government or the intelligence agencies or a combination thereof saw the writing on the wall of a terrorist attack, and as hinted in PNAC, absent in New Pearl Harbor, that they let it happen. Dr. Barrett is of the mindset, and with evidence, that it was MIHOP, make it happen on purpose. And any position I hold on this isn't me dragging my feet for everybody listening. I'm open to the idea that the government let it happen. So it's already bad enough. So this isn't some like, oh, I don't know where you're coming from. To me, I'm just, if I had to put money on it, safe bet, I would say it was LIHOP. But Dr. Barrett is going to discuss on why it was MIHOP, make it happen on purpose. And I always remember one of the things he talked about was Hani Hanjour. I just always remember that name. How the hell did he pilot that plane into the Pentagon at that angle, at that altitude? Probably didn't. But with that, Dr. Barrett, could you please introduce yourself as I rudely post the live link?
Yeah, well, I'm a refugee from the academy, or I should say maybe a heretic who's been expelled from the academy due to my work on the 9/11 issue. My academic background is in French, English, and Arabic languages and literature, with an Islamic studies focus on my PhD, and specifically on Morocco. And so with my Arabic and Middle Eastern background, when 9/11 happened, the people from that part of the world just didn't believe that Osama bin Laden and his merry men could pull that off. The vast majority never believed it, still don't believe it. Pakistan, I think the poll showed only 2% of the people of Pakistan believe that Al-Qaeda did 9/11, and the rest either don't, almost all of them don't, or they have no opinion. So at that time, I was the only Muslim in Madison, Wisconsin, where I was teaching at the University of Wisconsin, that I talked about it with, that didn't just immediately assume that this was some kind of false flag, right? I said, well, let's wait till the evidence comes in. There's just not a lot of evidence. So I did. I kind of kept a track of the evidence that was starting to come in and some of the dissenting views that were coming in. People like Dr. Bob Bowman, the former head of the SDI program, that is the Star Wars program under two presidents, right, saying that there's no way that the fighter jets would have, the fighter jets should have been on any hijacked planes almost instantly.
Yeah.
Just like they were, on that golfer Stewart's jet,
and it
drifted away from the course. Or just what happened again a couple of days ago when a plane flew over DC off course, and boom, the jets are on its tail. So Dr. Bob Bowman, a fighter jet pilot, as well as a Caltech rocket science PhD and head of the Star Wars program, was saying there's no way it could happen like that. And a lot of people were backing him up. And so I was seeing all of this kind of stuff and saying, yeah, this looks pretty bad. Something here happened. This wasn't what we were told, but we'll probably really never know what happened. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to prove this to anybody. So I just kept doing my thing in the academy without focusing too hard on this, on 9/11. But then in late 2003, I heard that Dr. David Ray Griffin, a brilliant scholar who I was citing in my dissertation, was saying that they blew up the towers, they blew up the Trade Center, that whatever hit the Pentagon, it sure wasn't a hijacked plane. I said, really? Wow, that's pretty extreme. I better check it out. I did, and I saw, oh, he's right. Not only is he right, he's obviously right, that it doesn't even take all that much research to find out that this is the case. And so my thought was, this is actually worth putting some time and attention into, because we can prove it easily in such a way that anybody with just basic intelligence and an open mind can get it, right? And so if we can prove it that easily, we can change history. This is something. This is an Archimedes lever that is long enough to move the world.
Yeah.
So I started putting serious energy and attention into it. I had a very successful event with David Ray Griffin in April 2005 that was broadcast nationally on C-SPAN, and it was a breakthrough for the truth movement. And then in 2006, as the truth movement really kind of exploded and got, became too big to ignore, including the 100 scholars who had signed on to Scholars for 9/11 Truth, 100 professors in the United States mostly, who'd gotten into that group. At that point, the other side, the cover-up team, had to go to work, and they decided to nominate me as the whipping boy of Scholars for 9/11 Truth. So they would punish me publicly so that other professors would stay away from it. And that's how I got well known. I was brought on to Fox News and so on and so forth. So that's how I got into this issue. And I realized early on that this had to be, I always pronounce it LIHOP and MIHOP, and this had to be MIHOP, made it happen on purpose. And the reason for that is that there's simply no way that, especially with this particular bunch of accused hijackers and bin Laden, that had they simply heard that there was such a plot taking place and somehow given orders to ignore it. Now, how you're going to get everybody to obey those orders to ignore it, I don't know.
Sure.
But had they tried to do something like that, it wouldn't have succeeded to that extent. There hasn't been a successful hijacking in the United States since the 1970s. And there are technological reasons for that, including uninterruptible autopilot programs allowing for planes to be taken over from the ground. So if you tell somebody to fly the plane to Cuba, the pilot's going to suddenly the aircraft is going to land at the nearest airport, and the pilot's not going to have control of the plane. So there are all sorts of reasons why hijackings just don't work. And this notion that these doofuses who were not allowed to solo in Cessna training aircraft, who were simply going through the motions of pretending to learn to fly when they weren't even really learning to fly, and they were going through those motions at CIA drug import airstrips disguised as flight schools that were not flight schools. They were flight schools in name only, and the only people who pretended to pay money to learn to fly at those fake flight schools were these Arab guys that they later blamed for being doing 9/11. You put all of this together, and you see that, okay, if they're going to blow up the World Trade Center, which the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, among others, have proven that they did. So they've rigged out these incredibly expensive, ultra advanced demolitions, the biggest, most difficult demolition projects in all of human history, with blowing up, taking down the tallest buildings ever taken down in controlled demolitions by a factor of, many factors of magnitude. Mm-hmm. Even the building 7 was
still bigger,
half again as tall as the next tallest building.
Still blew everything else out of the
right. So they're gonna do this huge project in New York, blowing up the Trade Center. Now they're not going to imagine that just letting some doofuses who can't even fly Cessnas supposedly do hijackings, which are not doable. They're going to somehow get control of these planes. They're going to somehow actually be able to fly them when they can't even fly Cessnas. And they're somehow going to be flying straight into these buildings and succeed in hitting them and give us the excuse to blow them up. It ain't going to happen. So the only way that they could let it happen on purpose would be to make it happen on purpose. And that would involve making sure that planes actually hit towers. So you have the excuse to blow up the towers. And you can't trust any human to fly into a tower. You just can't. There's no human being that you could ever trust to actually pull that off. They would quite possibly get second thoughts. And if you put huge time and energy into preparing those buildings for demolition, you got to make sure that those planes hit those towers. So how do you do it?
Yeah,
right. You remote fly them. If you have a remote fly system that is pretty much guaranteed to hit them with that kind of accuracy, that's what you're going to use. So just that logic alone, and there are a lot of other things, but that's my opening of my case for, of course, you have to go to MIHOP. LIHOP, that let it happen on purpose, it may be psychologically more comfortable to think, oh, well, they're really evil, but they're not that evil. There's really these bad guys, these Muslim bad guys who are really the evildoers, and these good guys on our team, just let them do it. We are the bad guys. We've met the enemy, and he is us.
I should clarify, for me, and maybe that might be accurate for others, to me, it's not more psychologically appealing. I think evil is evil. You did it. To me, it has nothing to do with not attacking you. To me, this has nothing to do with, well, we're not that evil. Oh, no. Pit of vipers, a den of vipers. They'll do it. To me, I'm more looking at who did it and how did it happen? No part of me, by any means whatsoever, give our guys some benefit of the doubt. Evil
Right, but see,
demons from hell.
you still have the problem is with the LIHOP. Not only is it obviously not true,
Mhm.
but you still have that evil Muslim enemy that's capable of doing something like
The
this.
boogeyman from across
You
the
still
ocean.
got
He
the boogeyman.
looks different
Yeah.
from you. He's got a beard and dark skin and wears a turban.
Right.
Ooh, no, I got you. I got
So
you.
we went out and we killed 30 million Muslims because of this.
Mhm.
And if it was LIHOP, because there really were these Muslim terrorist hijackers who were, who flew these planes into these towers, then, well, there's still this Muslim terror problem that we had to deal with, yada, yada, yada.
Gotcha.
And yeah, but the fact is, no, there never was any such problem. There wasn't.
Gotcha.
I mean, in fact, the problem is that Muslims have been unable to defend themselves adequately. The reason for all of these wars on these Muslim countries is that they're weak. They're unable to defend themselves, which invites predation. And so the predators have been going in to steal the resources.
Yes, sitting on $1 trillion of oil. Yeah.
The thing that could happen would be all these Muslim countries would be led by radicals, people with the mentality of bin Laden, and that they would all have plenty of nuclear weapons. If that were the case, we would have a much more peaceful world. There would never have been these wars in the first place. If Saddam Hussein, for example, had nuclear weapons that could hit DC and New York, couldn't be defended against, millions of people would still be alive, and our country would be in America as well as Iraq would still be in much better shape. By people who believe that there are these evil Muslim terrorists, yada, 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 that leads to a complete misunderstanding of reality, and it leads them to acquiesce in these horrific and destructive deeds.
Gotcha. And no, I'm with you. Just as I'm for the Second Amendment, I think the Second Amendment applies to nation states. I think if we all had nukes, it'd be a lot more people. I really do. I'm not saying that sarcastically.
The best thing that could have happened would be for Saddam to have had WMD.
The
best thing that could have happened would be for Gaddafi to have WMD. The best thing that could have happened would be for Assad to have WMD and Iran to have WMD. If all those countries had the ability to adequately defend themselves, there wouldn't be any war in that region.
You don't roll up on a random house in suburbia because you're not sure who has a 12 gauge and who doesn't. Why doesn't that apply to nation states? It does. It absolutely does. It is quantifiably a more peaceful world in terms of total deaths, gross deaths, as well as percentage deaths since August 9th, 1945. It just is.
That's right.
Doesn't make it perfect, but it does. Yeah.
I used to live in dicey neighborhoods in a motorhome on the streets in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an NRA sticker. In fact, a bunch of NRA stickers on the door of my motorhome. That did make people, including police officers, not just cops, criminals, but cops too. They would think twice before they would come bursting into my motorhome while I was asleep at night.
Yeah, deterrence works, and you're absolutely correct. And I do think of one is let me write that down. The guy you mentioned early on, the former head of SDI. I never knew that. What was his name?
Colonel Robert Bowman.
Colonel Robert.
One of the great American heroes.
I'm writing that down. Colonel Robert Bowman.
Yeah, he's one of the greatest all-time American whistleblowers.
Absolutely. That's wild.
Yeah, he quit as head of SDI because the Strategic Defense Initiative, or the Star Wars program, was sold to the American people as a way of defending ourselves from enemy attack, from Russian nuclear missiles. In fact, it was a purely offensive program with no possible defensive rationale, because satellite platforms are vulnerable and they're going to be shot out first. If you have a war, the satellites are all going to be taken out. So the only purpose in having all that stuff up there was to strike first. Yeah. And what were they? It was stuff like according to Bowman in the 70s, they already had something that could set a whole city afire from outer space. They had artificial meteorites that would be dropped on enemy missile silos to take them out.
Tungsten
and all of this was part of a first strike program. And indeed, the U.S. is the only country on Earth to this day that has an official first strike nuclear strategy. That is, if there is going to be the possibility, the strong likelihood of a nuclear exchange, we are going to strike first. Russians won't do that. Theirs is purely defensive. Everybody else's is purely defensive. Even the Israelis say that, well, this is only a Samson option. And if we have if it looks like we have to give up and let the Palestinians have their country back, we're going to blow up the whole world. We're going to blow up all the capitals of Europe as well as the Middle East. But in a sense, that is defensive.
Still defensive.
In a sense. I mean, the Israelis are they're offensive because they're invaders and occupiers of somebody else's land, but they want to keep that land. And so they're trying to defend their stolen property using that. But the U.S., we have a first strike doctrine. We are going to initiate the apocalypse and kill hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people. And it's shameful.
The Casaba howitzer, CASABA, it's a shape charge, but where the explosive is, instead of TNT or Semtex, it's a thermonuclear warhead in orbit. It's a Casaba howitzer, so it shoots a beam at whatever. It's a death ray, is what it is, and that was. I mean, shit. I think the documents for that go back to like the 80s. Yeah, no, 1,000%. Yeah, that's not. There's satellites have no staying power. That is the first thing that is wiped out. That is the first thing that is wiped out. Absolutely, it's a first strike capability.
Yeah.
To go, so I want to go back to, because isn't the air park, is it the Pineal Air Park? Isn't that where they did some of the training?
Possibly, yeah. There were two flight schools. I'm trying to remember the names. There were the most interesting ones were these two ones in Central Florida, owned by was it Rudy Deckers was one of the guys. There were these two Dutch guys that Daniel Hopsicker, in his book Welcome to Terrorland, has called the Magic Dutch Boys. Now, these were both Dutch nationals with alleged links to organized crime, who went in and bought up these failed, airstrip operations and put up signs saying we are a flight school, but then attracted basically no business at all, except for Muhammad Atta and his friends, who went there to pretend to learn to fly. Now, the other pilots actually didn't know how to fly. Now, the Atta, well, we ask which Atta. And it's the same for a couple of these other guys, like which Ziad Jarrah. Look at the official pictures from driver's licenses, passports, and so on of Ziad Jarrah, who is the Lebanese alleged hijacker. They're three different people, obviously three different people, posed for his official ID. And with Muhammad Atta, there are at least two. One was the very shy Egyptian Atta, who was an architecture student in Germany. And then his identity was stolen. And the Atta who was running around Central Florida, who looked somewhat like him, was a Hebrew-speaking psychopath. And the loud, brash, drug and alcohol-loving, pink-haired stripper-dating Hebrew-speaking psychopath. And that was presumably an Israeli imposter. So all of what was going on there was that apparently these guys were being set up. It's unclear, to what extent, Israeli intelligence and American intelligence were collaborating, to what extent this was really being run by whom. The 15 out of the 19 alleged hijackers who came from Saudi Arabia were brought to the U.S. on snitch visas, a special kind of visa that's issued by the CIA to people in the Saudi nationals who do something for the CIA in Saudi Arabia. They get a fistful of cash and a free ticket to the United States and a special visa. It actually has a code on it. So the people who were in the know, the intelligence people, they know that this is a CIA snitch visa. So this is a CIA asset. Every one of those 15 Saudis had a CIA issued snitch visa. And so they were sent over here. They pretended to learn to fly at flight schools and so on. They party like crazy, including partying at U.S. Military officers clubs and such. They stayed the night before 9/11. A bunch of them stayed overnight. The ones who got on, supposedly hijacked the DC plane, they stayed overnight right across, literally across the street from the gates of the National Security Agency headquarters.
Yeah, right there.
Fort Meade. Yep, yeah. And while they were there, they exercised at the gym that is where all the NSA guys exercise. And others were regulars at the officers club at that air base in Florida. Now, all of this stuff came out right after, within days of 9/11. And the mainstream journalists were kind of like, what, and asked. So they called up the military to get their comment on this. And essentially, the military issued a non-denial denial to all intents and purposes, admitting that it's true that these guys had been, basically partying and admitted to, and in some cases living and staying at secure U.S. military facilities. And then all of that sort of got airbrushed out and left out of the 9/11 Commission report, just like so many other things did.
Good Lord. Now, do you think that the quote unquote hijackers, do you think they were in on it, or do you think that they were actually learning to pilot, and because you technically wouldn't need to read them in, you would just have to get them in the plane, and then you use that as your excuse to do the remote control.
Right. Yeah, I think they were. I'm sure they had no idea what they were involved
Yeah,
with. I think
yeah,
they were just typical Saudi CIA assets. I think they were chosen probably for their low intelligence, actually, and then they were brought over, and they imagined that they were like, oh, they're living it up here. They used to be kind of nobodies in Saudi Arabia. Now they're given this ticket to the U.S. They're given fistfuls of cash. They're snorting cocaine. They're chasing prostitutes. They're gambling on Abramoff's casino boats. They're flying regularly to Las Vegas to gamble. That's the lifestyle these guys had.
sure.
And meanwhile, they're just being asked to sort of go through the motions and, okay, you go, here's a ticket to this health club, go pretend you're lifting weights there. They didn't just pretend, they didn't actually lift any weights. These are supposedly the muscle guys. They're like 98-pound shrimps. It's a complete joke. And so it looks to me like the whole thing was they're just totally set up. And yeah, it was set up to make it look like they were on the planes, only they probably weren't. It looks like some, or maybe probably all of them, got the jitters at the end and maybe suspected that something was up, and because there's no evidence that they were on the planes. And if they had actually gotten on the planes, there would be evidence. There would be all kinds of security camera footage. There would be ticket stubs. There would be official stamped airline passenger lists with their names on them. And there would be testimony from the airline employees who ticketed and boarded them. However, none of that has ever been produced. What the government has done to cover up the fact that they never produced that, and they had to produce it legally under international law. If they're going to charge these guys with this crime, they have to produce that evidence that they were on the planes, but they never did. So what did they show to try to take our eyes off the ball?
Of Otta, the famous picture of Otta
Yeah,
walking in.
yeah, fake pictures. They had a picture of Otta that was taken at the wrong airport. That wasn't the right airport. And they had a picture of the guys at Dulles Airport that was not an authentic security image. It was clearly a fake. It was not authenticated with the numbers, date stamp, and so on that you would have with a real security image. So we have no idea when this picture that they gave the media was ever taken, or even if it was real for that matter. But certainly that picture, it could have showed them at any time in the past. Could have been from a year ago, 2 years ago. So that's all. Two pictures is all we've ever been given, and both of those pictures were laughably bogus.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, I'm kind of thinking it out now. You wouldn't even have to have guys that were on board for a suicide mission. You could have said, "Hey, you're going to hijack these planes and going to land them," and then you take them over remote control. Or you don't even tell them you're hijacking. You just
why tell them you're even hijacking?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we're moving you. You're an asset. We're moving you.
Yeah, you're taking this flight. Yeah,
that's an even better point. Yeah, you don't even. It's not even you got to hijack because you could still have cold feet. What if it goes wrong? Yeah, you just tell them we're moving you. We're moving you here. You need to know. You don't need to know.
Look at the Lone Gunman episode that broadcast a few months before 9/11. That's remote planes being remotely flown into the Twin Towers.
Oh.
Yeah, you wonder why they would do that. But there are a lot of these cases of what looks like it's predictive programming.
What is that? What is predictive program? Not to go off on a side. What do you think that is? Is that a demoralization thing? We're in charge. Is that to sort of warm up the public consciousness to an idea? What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's partly to demoralize and make us say, "Wow, they're so in charge of this. They can show us what they're going to do." There's some testimony from people who've been on the inside in the black ops world who say that some of the people involved in this have some kind of bizarre metaphysical framework, whether they're Satanists or
if
some
they tell
sort of
you they're somehow released from the karma.
Yeah, that it's if they tell you what they're going to do and you don't stop, they do it, and you don't stop them, then you're the one who gets the bad karma, not them. So that's what some say. But also, I think we shouldn't forget that it does also sort of muddy the waters afterwards when like you and I sit here talking about, wow, look at that. The Simpsons predicted 9/11. I mean, look at that. You know, that it's obvious that the
Yeah.
Simpsons predicted it
Yeah.
uh, with the 9 and then the Twin Towers making the 11. Or, you know, look at that Lone Gunman episode,
Yeah.
right? So we're talking about that. And then the people who haven't figured this stuff out yet, right?
Makes us look crazy.
Yeah, the blue pill crowd, they
Yeah.
go, oh, well, these conspiracy theorists, the only reason they believe that 9/11 was an inside job is that they think that they saw some random thing in some TV show that prefigured it. And of course, that's ridiculous. Why would if they were going to do that, why would they prefigure it? So
Yeah.
it does, right. So it does muddy the waters and makes conspiracy people look crazy.
Yeah. And then if you go one step further and then you could release fake shit, you could be like, oh, that's proven that South Park did that after 9/11, right? And then you'd be like, so the whole thing's bunk, right? You could do a 9/11 episode afterwards and be like, The Simpsons actually released that note too. And then they actually could have a second. You'd be like, no, these are two different things. And all the while, it just muddies the water into this. It just trails off into you're insane. Carrigan, Barrett, you guys are off your rocker. I mean, yeah, and then the idea about the you're released from your karma. If that in itself would sound crazy, except for the fact that these people are occult Satanists. I mean, they do Bohemian Grove. Like, it's not. It's hard to grasp. Your brain kind of goes into this shock where you go, "That's not possible." But there's no. It's not like there isn't evidence for them being deeply, deeply occult. Like, it's all
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And so then when you try to explain this to people, the people who have been educated in the current paradigm, right? They have basically materialistic beliefs. They're materialists. That is, that they believe that we're living in a space-time continuum that's based on matter, and that sort of, Newtonian physics and the Enlightenment science describing the material world that's kind of how things are. And they don't believe in psychic powers and things like that. They don't believe in magic and the sorts of beliefs and practices that have been ubiquitous in people throughout almost every culture in all of history. The current paradigm is that no, none of that's true. And so anybody who's an occultist is really some kind of crank, and there's nothing to it. There's no truth to it. The only truth to magic is like power of suggestion, where you tell somebody that you've cast a spell on them and they're going to get sick, and so they do get sick because that they believe it, right? So that's the current materialistic paradigm. And so somebody from that paradigm who hears us say, well, these rulers of the world, these people who have enough power to pull off 9/11 or JFK assassination, they're actually occultists. This sounds weird, because like, why would crazy people be in charge? Why would people who are like superstitious and lower class, like non-educated types, how could they be in charge? Well, the solution to that paradox is that the materialistic paradigm is wrong.
Yeah.
And that indeed that the world is constructed by consciousness, and that human consciousness can and does influence the course of events. Quantum physics makes this absolutely clear.
Effect, yep.
Right. Yeah. So magic actually works. Things that Dean Radin has written a book about that.
Yeah.
Supernatural, I think, is the name of that book. He's written a number of good books about the scientific evidence for the reality of psi powers. Okay, so that means that what we really have is an elite that knows that materialism is wrong, that the mind can directly influence the course of events, and that there are ways and techniques, technology, if you will, for making that happen. And they're going to monopolize it. They don't want everybody getting in on it, right?
Oh yeah.
So naturally, one of the ways they monopolize it is by pushing this scientific, materialistic paradigm to dumb down everybody, so nobody realizes that this stuff works, that psi powers exist, and quote unquote magic actually works. People don't know that. Then these folks are left with a monopoly on those technologies. And so the people who have a very selfish and greedy ideology and want to use these technologies for their own aggrandizement, and that's the definition of black magic, is the people whose attitude towards all of this is basically selfish and in service to their passions and desires. So those people then try to monopolize it, and they actually get involved with the dark side of it, which is the dark side of it is the entities and powers that say, we'll help you get what you want. We'll help you aggrandize your ego and achieve your desires. You'll be wealthy, powerful, and so on. Get away with crimes, yada, yada, yada. If you sort
Do
of
our
work with
bidding.
us. And so some folks do. And these people who are committing these huge and horrendous crimes are part of that world. And they have a
Yeah.
lot of power in this world. The powers and principalities of this world are not all godly.
Not of flesh. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right. So actually, the old-fashioned sort of religious worldview from before the Enlightenment
They were on
has,
it.
yeah, even William Burroughs, right, the homosexual, wild and crazy beatnik genius, like famously said that people were right back in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
They had a much more accurate view of the world in the Middle Ages than people today do.
No, and just for full disclosure, I agree with everything you just said. And I have for a
Okay.
while. That's you don't have to walk out there with me. No, I fully believe that because I mean, truly it makes sense in the form of just look at it as technology, which is what you said. Well, what is DARPA? What is the NSA? What do they have? Classified technology. You keep it classified, special access program, because it's a way to impose your will, whether it's radar absorbing material on a stealth bomber, whether it's a nuclear weapon, whether it's an orbital based directed energy weapon. It's all an energy source, or not an energy source, excuse me, a power source. It's a weapon. It's all classified. And by the time we figure it out, there's something more classified. Well, what would be the most classified top down control system? Hey, your prison walls are constructed by your own illusions, or rather, they're constructed by what we're telling you, and you have no idea. But if you wanted to, you could theoretically dissolve these metaphorical prison walls and bars and walk out and be free. Why
It's
would
funny
you
you
keep
use
that
that
classified?
metaphor.
Why? Yeah.
It's wonderful you're using that metaphor because in John Ronson's wonderful book, The Men Who Stare at Goats, which was turned into a film, General Albert Stubblebine, who
Yep.
was in fact the highest ranking
Head of
military
head of
9/11
JSOC.
truther.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he passed away a few years ago. Ronson, he hilariously describes how Stubblebine, who was part of these military efforts to harness psychic powers,
Mm-hmm.
believed that someday he would succeed in walking through walls simply by psyching himself into the right state of mind and walking right into the wall, and that he would go right through it like a ghost. But Johnson describes how he says he tried it several times, but all he got was a bump on his head.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it takes practice, but no, I've interviewed Dr. Dale Graff, who's the head of Stargate project or Stargate program, the CIA's ESP thing. It's
Cool.
yeah, no, it's wild stuff, and so it is. It's the analogy I always use is this concerning like the occult and just consciousness control reality. Is like be like if I wanted to play basketball, right? And I was learning a jump shot, I was learning to do left hand layups, I was learning to do chest, whatever. And I would look at better and better players. I would look at varsity players. I would look at college players, and I would want to get closer and closer to their advice. These guys are better. You want to be the best. And then finally, if you got to the tippy top, if you got to a LeBron, you got to a Steph Curry, you got to a Michael Jordan, and if they gave you a piece of advice that seems so wild, they'd be like, before every game, I'm just making something up. I rub a lemon on my thighs. You'd go, now what would you do? Would you go, these guys are nuts, or would you go, he's got 6 rings? And if anyone else says that guy's nuts, well, who's really nuts? You, who can't get enough playing time on your high school team, or the guy with 6 rings? I would go, no, he's not nuts. You're stupid for not taking the advice from the GOAT. So that's kind of how I look at this is, we look at smarter and smarter and smarter, higher and higher and higher up in the military, the corporate, all these intelligence echelons. If you get to the apex and they're doing some weird predictive programming, mind control, sacrifice, working with dark spirits, do you look at them and go, they're idiots? Or do you have a humbling moment and go, maybe we're the idiots? And that's kind of how I feel about this. And that's what you would do is you would ostracize it. You would make fun of it. You would, oh, you a new age hippie girl. Like that's what you would do. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Although I would have to say that I do look down on those people to a certain extent because I think that, they've really seriously screwed up by following that path of
Oh no, no, no.
self-aggrandizement.
Oh no, they're evil pieces of shit.
Yeah.
I'm talking about just the general idea of the thing they are practicing. It is silly to assume it's bunk. Now they're using it for wrong, but it's like if we said nuclear power was bad. because some guys believed in it. Now they'd be using it for A bombs, and that doesn't make them good, but it doesn't mean that nuclear power isn't real. It's just that it could be used for reactors to power a hospital or something.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
where I'm coming at. No,
Yeah,
they're
that's Dean
evil.
Radin's position.
Yeah. No, they're evil, but the thing they're doing isn't bunk. It does work, and that's so I'm with you on that entirely. Predictive, all of that. I really, why else? How else would it work? Why
Mhm.
wouldn't it work that way?
Yeah, yeah. So that's, of course, this you bring this into the discussion of 9/11, and people say, "Wow, you guys like it. You guys are really crazy." Here I was going to listen to this 9/11 stuff with your science and your architects and engineers. These people citing strong scientific evidence for your case, but now you're talking about psychic powers and magic and men who stare at goats and all this sort of thing. So you must be really crazy. But I think there. Speaking of which, I think it's interesting that right at this moment, as we speak, the so-called push for UFO disclosure seems to be intensifying, and I think there is a link between the this UFO issue and then the issue of psi and psi powers. In
Okay.
both cases, you have the establishment mocking and deriding people who believe these crazy things, who believe that people have psychic powers and magic works. Wow, you must be really uneducated and crazy. You're the hippie or whatever. And likewise with the UFOs and the aliens, and oh yeah, like yeah, right. They've crashed, they've recovered crashed bodies of aliens and crashed saucer pieces. They're reverse engineering this stuff. Yeah, right. However, we're now at a point in history where over the past maybe 3 to 5 years, the New York Times and other august establishment journals have been preparing us to switch their story on this whole UFO thing.
Mm-hmm.
They keep, they've been very respectfully suddenly treating the UFO disclosure movement, or at least parts of it, over the past 3 to 5 years. And now we have this new so-called whistleblower guy, Grolsch or whatever his name is, that guy who has a very serious intelligence background, who just let slip, oh yeah, we actually have these, crashed saucers and alien bodies. And to the extent it's being discussed quite relatively respectfully in the mainstream media. They don't have any obvious way to try to say that this guy is a crank or a crazy guy. He's got a really high level background with no serious flaws. So that's it's and the tie-in here, the reason I'm bringing that up along with this issue of magic and psychic powers, is that reports about these ET phenomena, a lot of them suggest that whatever these ETs are, they have some kind of connection to psychic powers. That is, the people who've dealt with these entities talk about communicating telepathically. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, with the abduction reports, you can give those whatever credence you want, but there are huge numbers of abduction reports. If you start hypnotizing people, you start finding ridiculous numbers of people who seem to have these buried memories, and they describe similar things in many cases. Those reports seem to involve not just telepathy, but all kinds of really uncanny abilities, such as the ability to take people through walls. Talk about Stubblebine trying to walk through a wall. Well, if you believe in these abduction stories, some of the ETs are able to take people through their ceilings and roofs straight into the vehicle and things like that. So, and then to sort of reset reality in these really weird ways. So I think there's a link between these two things. That is, that however you want to think about these entities. I mean, you can go along with Charles Upton and say we're just talking about like demonic entities, period. Or whether you want to think that, well, some of them are actually sort of material beings like us coming in physical ships, but maybe they also have developed some psychic abilities. In any case, you're dealing with, as we admit that this phenomenon is real, then we also admit that the world of psychic abilities and the other world, or the alam al-akhar, where spirits and jinn live, is also real. And indeed,
Mm-hmm.
there's a huge overlap. Some of these entities, or maybe all of them, as Upton suggests, might very well turn out to be basically spirits and jinn, or what our less technologically oriented ancestors talked about as spirits and jinn. So when we admit that this phenomenon is real, we're also going to admit that ESP and psychic phenomena are real.
starting to kind of really expand the Overton window of you can't write it all off with mockery. And you're correct. I mean, man, you got to respect the enemy. They do a good job at mocking it relentlessly for 80 years. And then really over the course of about 3 years, turning it entirely to a respectful level of discourse. Should we be wondering about these UFO? I mean, they really just trained an old dog a new trick. They just did a 180, and I mean, it's not impressive.
They're trying to sneak out of their dilemma. You know, they're in this
Yeah,
dilemma where we've been lying through our teeth for, for almost a century now.
yeah.
Yeah, well, more than half a century anyway. And now, if we're going to tell any truth at all, how do we do it in such a way that people don't just start throwing rotten fruit at us for lying to them for decades and decades, so shamelessly?
Well, you appeal to the ego, you appeal to the intellectual. You go, well, it's not all craziness. It's actually we do live in a vast universe with other beings, and or you appeal to people's. They don't want to feel like the dumb conspiracy theorist one. You appeal to the smart guys, so everyone gets to have their nose up in the air. Well, of course, there's other life in the universe. It's a for
But
lack of
if you're smart, you're going to say, well, why were you guys lying to us so outrageously all these years and even killing people to try to keep this secret? What's with that?
yeah, 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 of course, and that's where you and I are, and that's why we're kind of boxed out. But no, yeah, it's kind of funny. Yeah, we're gonna talk about 9/11. We're 30 minutes in, and I'm like, I'm with you. The devil runs it all, and it's like, yeah, but that's kind of where the discussion goes. But I mean,
Yeah.
for the sake of thoroughness, because I completely forgot we were having a 9/11 discussion. For the sake of thoroughness, for people that did tune in for MIHOP, LIHOP, how taking down the buildings, if it would be so advanced, right? It would have to be, and it is, the biggest. You have 210-story skyscrapers and a 47-story skyscraper. I know the one often floated around is the idea of thermite or nanothermite, and then you talked about you educated me last time on gelatin and E-team and access to the elevator shafts and security clearances to basically run around the World Trade Center roughshod. Is that is that how it was done? Is some sort of, I mean, obviously, if you're going to plant explosives, you'd have to ensure it, just like you'd have to have remote control to ensure it happened. You can't screw up the big game. You also have to ensure that the buildings did fall. What, to your best understanding, is the method that they took the towers down?
Well, first, I think it was probably redundant. That is, as you say, they really wanted to make sure that it happened. And, if you half blow it up, but it doesn't come all the way down, that could be a problem in various ways. And that may have happened with 7, actually. They may have screwed up with 7 and not made it redundant enough, and something may have gone wrong, which is why 7 maybe it was supposed to originally come down under the dust cloud of the towers, which would have been maybe 10:30 in the morning, when the first huge explosions in Building 7 actually went off. I believe it was before the towers came down. So that may have been a mistake. But in any case, they didn't want that to happen. And with the towers, they may have had something redundant in place. That is, they may have not only had cutter charges to take out the steel frame members, but they may also have had some higher energy mechanism that ended up pulverizing a lot of the dust and producing some of the unusual phenomena associated with the destruction of the towers. With Building 7, it's a classic old-fashioned demolition from the taking out the frame members all the way through the whole building. So it just comes down sort of like an elevator straight into the earth at near free fall. It is absolute free fall for the first 2.5 seconds. But with the towers, they started blowing them up from the top down. So the towers, it doesn't look like a normal demolition. It looks like they're just being exploded from the top down. And I would imagine that along with taking out the steel frame members through some combination of conventional explosives, and there's some evidence against the conventional explosives in that the explosions may not have been loud enough. But if you had conventional explosives, the reports might have been actually louder than what we have. I mean, there were reports of explosions, but there's a question about whether, if the whole thing were done with conventional explosives, whether it would have been even more obvious, too obvious. Thermite charges, which can be set to be somewhere between accelerant and explosive could slice through the metal of the frame members and cut through all that metal, which takes away the ability of the building to be holding itself up. So they could have used those, but again, with the towers, it looks like, to me at least, that something other than that was used, because if you just looking at the difference between what happened to the towers and what happened to building 7 and all other buildings that are conventionally demolished, whatever they were using to blow up the towers from the top down appears to have involved a lot more energy, a lot more explosive energy than what you would get if they were just taking out the frame, the supporting members, the columns. If they were just slicing through columns so that suddenly all the columns suddenly cease to exist at all at the same moment, the towers, like building 7, or like these Las Vegas hotels that you've seen coming down in the thing, the towers would just go shh, like building 7 did. But instead the towers were
Yeah.
So what is causing them to explode like that? And the answer has got to be something is doing that. And yet whether it was loud enough, or we do see to some extent as these like popping out squibs, boom, 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 going around the building, suggesting some explosive process. But it's also been suggested that there may have been some kind of for instance, there's a nuclear hypothesis associated with a guy like Pommier, is one of the French physicists, I think, who've talked about that. So those guys think that they might have taken out the core columns in the center of the building by having a nuclear bomb in the basement, which apparently was patented, and it's patented way to take down tall buildings that's been around since the 60s. Is you have a nuke in the basement, and it is set up in such a way into the bedrock below the building that you get sort of the equivalent of a shape charge when it goes off, and it goes up and hits. It uses its energy to melt the core columns.
Okay.
And so the core columns might have been taken out that way, and then they might have had redundant cutter charges, which could either be explosives or nanothermite cutter charges as well, or they could have done the core columns primarily with the nuke, and the outer perimeter columns with cutter charges. So that would be my answer. Would it be some combination of those two things? Conventional cutter charges, which could either be conventional explosives or nanothermite, with a possibility of some nuclear device or its equivalent. And of course, there's the Judy Wood theory about the space beams, which I don't find persuasive. That it would have, but something else that would act the way that this hypothetical nuclear bomb in the bedrock would act, that we don't know about, that's all classified. I mean, of course, that's always a possibility too.
Yeah, I always have to catch myself and not use the technology was classified, because that's kind of a convenient, not saying that that's what you're saying, but it's kind of convenient Deus Ex Machina. Well,
I agree.
That's
why I like the nuclear.
The
nuclear hypothesis talks
that's
about
doable. That's understandable.
Yeah, it is totally doable with what yes and no, though. The problem there, of course, is that the nuclear hypothesis does rely on the fact that
the radioactivity.
Exactly. The latest generation nukes don't leave the radioactive signature that earlier ones did. And we don't know that for sure because it's all classified. Yeah. But we strongly suspect that that's the case.
Back to SDI, and there was something called the Shiva Star. And it's back to the kind of occult thing, man. It does go to the highest levels, but there was something they made, and it's eerie looking. You can look it up on Wikipedia. I think they changed the name several times, but I think the project went dark in 1990, the year I was born. I mean, that 32 years ago, but it was about shooting plasma balls from space-based ICBM defense. They would be kind of a new iteration of guarding, America. And it's not a typo. I always thought it was a typo. I always thought they meant meters, but no, it's shooting them at 10,000 kilometers a second. It's shooting these things with these massive capacitor banks. And it's not that the project went unfunded, it went classified, and there's just no updates starting in 1990. I mean, if we're talking about shooting an energy source super fast. And this, theoretically, I don't think there was any radioactivity. I think it was all X-rays. So
Hmm.
now I don't know how do you fit that down there. I have no idea. That's, I mean, if you really wanted to get in there, I mean, I don't know, burrow under it, but this seems like we're getting more and more complicated now. Um,
Mhm.
but that's no, you would do. It's like the line from JFK about the coup, right? Is it has to succeed. It's like you can't, and that's the idea of like multiple shooters in Dealey Plaza. If you're gonna do this thing, it has to. There's no half measures here. We've committed the crime. We're going in and we're going to do it now, right? If you're going in to rob the bank, you got to shoot the cameras and you got to shoot everyone and take once you've whipped out the gun in the bank, you're already going to jail for life. You have to complete the deed. And I think that's what they did is you got to you got to go for it. You got to go for it and you got to, win it. Now granted winning means they're evil demons from hell, but nonetheless, that's what you would do is you would have redundancy on redundancy. And if it's for something this big, right, absent a new Pearl Harbor so that we can go and genocide a bunch of Muslims and then go, take trillions of dollars of resources. That's for all the marbles, man. You're pulling out everything. You're not doing some half measure. You're not doing some, Wile E. Coyote, TNT plunger. No, you're gonna pull out the Black Ops DARPA tech, right? You're gonna pull out everything, and that's
Mhm.
what it would be, man. That's what it would be, and it's and of course this then completely, excuse my French, shits all over the LIHOP hypothesis because these guys
Mhm.
with box cutters didn't have some nuclear shaped charge and thermite pain and energy weapons.
That's right. Yeah. So it sounds like I'm converting you to
You
my.
are. You're bringing me over. You're bringing me over to your side. I have. I can say I have no. I would like to think. Well, I am a human stuck in this human body, but I'd like to say, or I like to think, I don't have any ego involved with this. There's no. The very fact that it wasn't the story we're told to me makes it already just dialed up to 11 that it's evil. It doesn't matter. It does matter, but to me, it's just evil beyond evil. To me, I have to be more convinced, and I'm getting more there. And again, I don't know. Who knows? I mean, Dr. Judy Wood, is she? Who knows? Is she disinformation? I don't know. I've watched her lecture. I think I like it, but I also just love. I also like Transformers movies, so I don't know. Maybe I just like to be entertained. But she talks about that the Richter scale. It should have registered a much larger impact from the buildings collapsing, and it registered like a tenth of it. And she thinks that gives more credence to her hypothesis that these were quote unquote dustified by an
Mhm.
energy weapon, and that's
And,
why
and
we
actually,
didn't.
that supports the nuclear hypothesis
Sure,
in that nuke might be a mechanism for pulverizing the
obliteration to
concrete.
its constituent, yeah, just components.
Because there is, that argument which she makes, which I think has some validity,
So, has
is
some, yeah,
it, yeah, is that the weight, the actual weight of these buildings was somehow removed.
yeah,
That is that, and a lot of that weight was in concrete, and that concrete she says was dustified.
yeah,
That is that much more of it was pulverized into sub 100 micron dust than would be expected in, let's say, if they had just cut the steel frame members and let gravity do the work, you would have had the amount of energy available would have been expended in as each part of the building hits the next part and so on, and the overall amount of energy wouldn't have been anywhere near enough to crush everything that way, and indeed to make human bodies disappear. More than 1,000 of the victims who were killed in those towers didn't leave a single
nothing.
shred of bone or fingernail or anything to DNA test. It just, their bodies just vaporized, just disappeared. If you had a gravity driven collapse, those bodies would still be basically squashed but intact.
Yeah,
It would have been a piece of cake, and every single one of them would have had their remains discovered and they would have been identified. But in reality, what happened was that whatever happened to those buildings, it created way too much dust. It blasted the concrete into way too small smithereens, and it caused entire human bodies to just completely disappear. So
yeah,
what could do that? Well, again, it's something very, very high energy. And again, I think the best candidate that we can identify is a nuclear weapon in the basement, that Pommier hypothesis. And I'm not totally, a card carrying member of that group,
sure,
and I listen to the people who say, no, it could have been just the thermite. But I still don't see how nanothermite, which is just causing, it's just cutting the columns and letting gravity do the work. I don't see how that causes 1,000 human bodies to just vanish completely.
And it's such a it's not a fringe argument. I mean, a very basic thing should be conservation of matter. Okay, sure, you're gonna have a certain amount of stuff. If you brought it out to 10 decimal points, yeah, sure, it probably wouldn't weigh as much as the original tower because you did have stuff burned and paper and stuff, technically. But it would be pretty close to steel. Even if you melted the steel, it would still be there. The concrete would still be there. Sure, some bodies would be just vaporized by the jet fuel explosion, a fraction, but not all of them. That is too big of a thing to ignore. It's not that it's off by a tenth of a decimal point. The towers should have the very least, the law of conservation of matter should point to something very, no pun intended, very concrete, which does bring back to the high energy theorem. And it obviously we want to get as close to the truth as possible, but there's also sort of like we're doing process of elimination. And it's getting to a point where it's like we maybe don't necessarily need to find out if it was a nuclear shaped charge or if it was a space-based energy weapon. The thing we're getting at is it was an insanely advanced high energy phenomena.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe, some people and others think that a large amount of nanothermite explosively deployed, possibly like painted on the subflooring so that would demolish the concrete. There are people who think there's some way that a lot of nanothermite could actually do this, and who knows? I don't know for sure. But one more thing to mention to show that this was a very high energy explosive process, couldn't be explained just by gravity, is the tiny little shards of bone fragments that were found all over the Deutsche Bank building, which was across the street. So how can a gravity-driven collapse in which this building just kind of goes straight down, how is that going to cause human bodies to explode into tiny little fragments that then spray way up in the air and end up landing over on the roof of the building across the street? No way. I mean, clearly something extremely explosive shattered those bodies and propelled them across the street.
And then all of this thus does swiftly remove LIHOP.
Yeah.
You can't you can't have your cake and eat it too. These guys can't be hut dwelling primitives and also have Black Ops DARPA tech. Choose one. Right? If the story was that China did it, yeah, maybe you could go, well, they've got their own advanced. You can't say that it's this backwards warlord, opium, oil rich hellhole, and then also say they're, using the power of the gods. Which one is it? You can't have.
Yeah, it would be a heck of a complex operation for any foreign government to pull off. False flags are the easiest kind of military operation to pull off because you've got control of the command chain, you've got control of your defenses, and so you can make sure that the people whose job is to prevent foreign adversaries from doing things against you, they can be made to look the other way. So that's the element of truth in LIHOP. I mean, the truth is that our the guardians whose job is to make sure nothing like this happened failed. But the reason they failed wasn't that there was some order, just look away while these Al Qaeda guys do what they do. The reason they failed was that they were given types of orders that were devised by people on the inside who knew how to circumvent the various kinds of defenses that would exist, and how to make the right people lay down on the job. For instance, the satellite office, right? They devised a drill. One of the 46 drills of 9/11, of which more than 25 were actually ongoing on that day, September 11, 2001, making it the biggest national security special event day in American history, and it's pre-designated as such, right? So one of those exercises in live was a live fly plane into building exercise targeting the National Reconnaissance Office. And that's National Reconnaissance Office, their job is to monitor what our satellites are seeing from space.
Yeah.
So if you were a foreign adversary, you would have no particular reason to do this. But if you're an inside jobber and you're playing games with the planes, for example, let's say you're doing plane swaps or whatever, or there's some reason that that these exercises that are being the pre-designated exercises in which planes, our fighter jets, are being sent to the North Pole to pretend that the Russians are coming, and all of these zillions of exercises going on that day. And the thing is, you don't really want people to see what's happening in the airspace over America. Whatever is happening, it isn't what you're going to tell the world. You're going to tell the world that these flights were hijacked, they flew here, they turned around, they hit their targets. And that wasn't really what happened. So you want to make sure that the people in the National Reconnaissance Office can't see what's happening in real time. And you want to maybe even be able to move in there with your guys and make sure that they won't see the recordings either. So how do you do that? Well, you have a live fly plane into building exercise that forces the evacuation of the National Reconnaissance Office right before the whole thing happens that morning. And so, again, more evidence that this is MIHOP, not LIHOP, is that whoever did this scheduled the exercise that led to the evacuation of the National Reconnaissance Office that morning, ensuring that nobody who was unauthorized would see the satellite imagery of what was really happening and what really did happen in our skies.
And I realized, and I'll keep you for another 15 minutes, and then I will release you from my bonds. I know I talk your ear off. I'm just now we haven't even touched the Pentagon.
Yeah.
We haven't even touched the Pentagon. So what was that? Was that is that missile? Because the Pentagon seemed, and I know much less about the Pentagon than I do about the World Trade Center. That, aside from the fact that there's no plane parts and the cameras didn't work, that one seems a lot less alien than, right? World Trade Center, there's so many anomalies. The Pentagon seems a little more like, what did they just, was that like an afterthought? They just fired a cruise missile at it? That one seems a lot less complex.
Yeah, well, with the Pentagon, the thing to keep in mind is that rather than getting lost in this argument about, oh, did an actual plane hit the Pentagon or not, which is the way that it's been framed, and I think maybe the bad guys want it to be framed that way. Okay. It's really much more useful to just say, look at this official story that they've given us. What a joke! What an insult to our intelligence that we could ever believe that what they're saying is the case. The official story being that this team of hijackers somehow waited until they were over Ohio to get this plane, take control of it, and then the pilot Hani Hanjour, who the 9/11 Commission tells us was the best of these 9/11 pilots, but in fact it was well documented that he was so bad that he was not even allowed to solo in a Cessna training aircraft. The official story tells us that Hani Hanjour seizes control of this plane over Ohio, turns it around, makes a beeline for Washington, D.C. It's not seen on any radars or tracking devices because he turned off his transponder. Okay, so that means you can fly a commercial aircraft anywhere all over the country. Nobody sees you if you just turn off the transponder. Yeah, right. So he turns off his transponder. He flies straight to D.C. Nobody notices this. Nobody has the slightest idea where this plane is until it suddenly shows up like right over downtown Washington, D.C. He overflies the Pentagon and then turns around, does a corkscrew dive, pulling so many G's, it's questionable whether he could have remained conscious.
Yeah.
And his corkscrew then comes in at ground level, skimming the grass, but not putting a mark on it, not touching the lawn, in order to go right into the bottom floor of the Pentagon at the spot furthest away from all of the top brass and into the spot that was just heavily reinforced right before this. Yeah. And in doing so, he happens to kill the accountants who were presumably on the trail of the 2.3 trillion. So this official story is completely ludicrous. And, the claim is this plane came in at 560 miles an hour, flipping the lawn. This ridiculous rate of speed that it has been hotly debated in the community of pilots whether a commercial aircraft could even reach that speed. But what isn't debated is that nobody's going to keep control of a plane at that speed, least of all a guy who can't fly a Cessna. So that whole story is just ludicrous. And then we can get lost in, well, so what really happened? Well, was it a missile? Was it a different kind of aircraft? And there are all sorts of little, red herrings and leads
Little,
leading,
yeah,
leading you off in this direction, leading in that direction. At the end of the day, there's a revisionist group within the 9/11 truth movement that argues that the evidence, the actual forensic evidence, is consistent with a large plane hitting the Pentagon at about the same trajectory as the official story alleges, at a very high rate of speed. So they, I think, have a reasonably good argument that a large plane may have done that at that super high rate of speed. Yet that does not help the official story at all, because again, the notion that any human pilot, least of all a guy who can't solo in a Cessna, could and would have done this, when in fact any real hijacker who wanted to hit the Pentagon would just plunge into the roof, and
yeah,
they would, if anything, they would lean towards the opposite side of the Pentagon where all the top brass are.
yeah,
You plunge into the roof over on that side where the
yeah.
top brass are, you take out a bunch of top brass, you'd be sure to hit the building. It's a huge building, it's like
It's like
multi-acres.
massive.
Yeah, really easy. So that if you're a hijacker pilot, what you're going to do is you're going to fly at a controllable speed. You're not going to take it, you go 560 miles an hour and take a chance, like as in a sure chance that you're not going to maintain control. Instead, you're going to fly at a manageable speed, or high up, and then you're going to come down right into the middle, a little towards where the top brass are, and you can't miss.
Yeah,
And you maximize damage that way. A real hijacker pilot would do that. And so this notion that
but he hits the side.
what Hani Anger supposedly did, that's such a joke. And so anyway, I'm open to the possibility that these revisionists are right, and that a large
Sure.
plane actually did hit the Pentagon on the flight path that's been described. And to me, that just adds reinforcement to the argument that the official story of this is a grotesque and laughable lie.
Yeah, it's either the story's BS. He didn't pull those G's at that speed and basically come in with sniper precision. Instead of hitting a pizza from the top down, he chose the thin crust on the side. And it's like,
Exactly.
that's a wild shot. Or it did happen, which means this guy didn't do that.
Mm.
It's either Lee Harvey was a lone gunman, which he wasn't, or he did pull off those shots, meaning that he wasn't just some guy. He would be a world-class, gunman. So yeah, I mean, you're moving me over. You're moving me
I would
over.
hope so. It sounds like it.
I hope I get do I get like a badge? Do I get an invite? Do I
Oh
get a
yeah,
comp?
I mean, what do you get? You get my respect for your openness to
Sure.
hearing arguments and willingness to
I'll
believe
take
them
it.
when they're good arguments. Of course, you've read enough about this that if I tried the same argument on someone who really didn't know about the issue, it might not work, because they just would have no way of evaluating what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have read enough to know that these crazy things I'm saying are actually true.
Well, I mean, despite us kind of, talking about the more importance of spiritualism, is there are, not all science is bunk, and there are still important lessons you can learn. There are spiritual lessons you can learn from scientific endeavors and scientific discovery. And if you let it, it can be a very humbling process where you go, do I really believe this, or do I believe it because I have believed it before and now I'm not willing to let go? And that itself can have spiritual implications and help you in your own personal life of, you know, do I really believe 2 + 2 is 5, or is there a little bit of ego involved? Am I blushing and I don't want to admit that I'm wrong? And it's if you can move towards it and remove emotion as best as we can as flawed humans, if you can remove emotion and try to take in all facts and figures and really try to just get to the truth, as if you're observing, as if 9/11 happened 2000 years ago and you and I are just talking about something that happened in ancient Egypt, with that same detachment. If you can start to approach things with that same detachment, you can get closer and closer to absolute reality, closer to God, closer to the truth, closer to whatever it is we're doing in this existence. And I think that's the real importance of it, is really, it wouldn't be that this episode's about 9/11. It's about put everything out on the table and use your most sober minded, rational, empirical deductive reasoning and go, what really had not, am I going to get made fun of? Am I going to be called crazy? Not, does this mean that I'm an idiot for having an American flag behind me? Remove it all and
Well,
just
far from it. If you respect the, honest patriotism, you're doing the right thing.
thank you, sir. Well, Dr. Barrett, always a pleasure to have you on, man. I look forward to the next episode. And guys, please go into the description, go check out Dr. Barrett's work, and thank you for your time. I this is everything I wanted it to be. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Tommy. I appreciate it. And
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
no, you're a true patriot. I mean, the real people the real patriots are the people who are trying to make their country live up to its highest ideals, and
Yes,
certainly to not let it descend to its lowest, most criminal depths. So
absolutely.
keep up the great work, and God bless.
Thank you, sir. God bless you as well, guys. Thank you so much.